After watching Mononoke the very first time, many years ago, I decided to make a video about it. And I went through 3 years worth of study notes from my art history classes, and I initially wrote a 26-page script about the art style, which was excessive. But let me explain why it might have been worth it. So on the note, Mononoke will be getting a movie soon. By now it's scheduled to be released this summer, 2024, so the time is, just right to shorten this script and get it out of the way. Mainly, I want to share some more depth about the style, what are the kabuki theater and the ukiyo-e references, which are, often rather casually thrown around when discussing Mononoke, because we will hear this again once the movie comes out. So buckle up, grab a drink, and get ready for some artsy theories. So what is this story about? We have our protagonist, our medicine seller, that travels across a feudal Japan in the search of evil spirits, ultimately called Mononoke, to exorcise them. So the story unravels like a detective story. It's mixed with mystery and some horror elements, usually with a variety of twists that are pretty satisfying to watch unfold. An interesting limitation in his exorcism is that he cannot simply exorcise the Mononoke. He must first learn its shape, its truth, and its reasoning in order to wield the exorcism sword against the Mononoke. And when he does, people react pretty surprised. That is interesting. So Mononoke plays perceivably somewhat near the end of the Edo period in Japan, depending on the episode, even during the Meiji Restoration. The Edo period saw a rather strict class system, with several ranks, and we often hear about the 4 main classes. Now, when people talk about the 4 classes, they usually mean that they had the samurai classes on top. It's the first level, the warrior class. The peasants and farmers made around 80% of the population, and they were on the second level. And below we had the peasants, the craftsmen and other townspeople. Even below that were the merchants, because they would not really produce anything of value for the population. Now we had distinguishings and also exceptions which were not classified in the same way. For instance, nobility and Buddhist monks, Shinto priests, and also, the social outcasts, for instance, beggars and prostitutes. And they were kind of exempt from these general classifications. And also the shogun would be on the top, of the warrior class as the ruler, and the supreme class of nobility above everyone else, of course, would be the emperor. And yes, you were born into your class, and mobility between the classes was not really something you could do. It's kind of like today, you will never be truly royal if you're not born into it, even if you buy the some lord title for like £50 on Amazon. So our protagonist in Mononoke is a merchant, and that means he will be around the bottom class of the native society. Now see, a merchant, not a warrior class, would not be allowed to have a sword. So therefore most people in the story act rather surprised to see the protagonist having a sword. And that's just a very beautiful detail and attention to detail that kind of adds to the overall detail of the show in general. Now Mononoke employs a rather unique and pretty bold art style that accentuates the supernatural elements. There were several directors, scriptwriters and editors who worked on it, and they all interpreted their limitations a tad different, so that also makes it, very exciting. And I found it intriguing as some episodes are just gorgeous experiments, and they mixed, the then new techniques of CGI and 2D together. And I don't want to go into technical details and rather focus on the 3 overarching threads that I want to highlight. So first it's the characters and it's the background designs. We see different techniques, people are drawn with rather bold lines and fat colors, sometimes even without shadows. While the backgrounds are a spectacle themselves, the second story arc in the clouds, for instance, is just marvelous. But they often feature distorted perspectives, impossible architecture, stylized elements, patterns, and abstract shades with, little shading. So that's kind of like the first thing. And then we have a kind of pretty wild camera and, shots. Sometimes we are the observers looking around, sometimes we are close up like we're inspecting panels in a comic book. And one such close-up shot that I found extremely fascinating that they used was the cut to the neck of the woman. I mean, you see this all the time in anime, yes, but this one here is a direct comparison to classical Japanese printmaking. It's called the Bijinga, the beautiful woman. It shows a vulnerable, almost erotic pose from the Edo period printmaking, showing your neck. The third part is definitely, how they display the drama. I mean, we definitely have to briefly look into the Heian and Edo period theater plays. This is also the most commonly discussed aspect of Mononoke that I found on anime forums, Reddit and in comments. The kabuki theater is pretty obvious, and there are obvious indicators for the theatricality, yes. However, we have to nerd out a bit deeper here, especially because of the first story arc and the usage of masks. So apart from these three things, the art is just very dense, it's densely packed. We see emotions displayed through surroundings, allegorical and symbolic imagery, and even intangible elements as part of the show, such as displaying smell. It's kind of like, modern perfume brands that try to evoke a sense of feeling instead of displaying the flavor itself. I mean, I get the message, but who wouldn't want to smell like a wet horse? So Mononoke took some exciting concepts that are extremely traditionally Japanese, and they experimented with them, so let me give you the crash course where the inspiration might have come from. So to look deeper into the way of the characters and backgrounds, how they came into being, we can look into Japanese printmaking of the period. We often see structure from paper, mixed media techniques, but also intense colors with a matte finish and a flat style. So the connection is actually kind of obvious. A matte or matte finish means that there is no gloss. Compare the Mononoke to an anime like 5 centimeters per second, and I think you get the idea. In artsy terms, a flat painting style means that you draw with no shading and little perspective. Thus, you would not use lighting to create depth. So this flat style is actually still pretty common. For instance, Seibu Railway has manner posters and on how to behave, and I find them hilarious. But the lack of shadows also lets you interpret scenes differently, as you would if they were naturalistic. We are used to seeing certain forms having a shade or a shadow naturally, and it gives depth to the form and our brain puts it into perspective. And the lack of shadows can make things, feel wrong or unnatural. But not everything that looks or feels unusual means that it is wrong, or in the concept of Mononoke, that it is evil. Think about the shadow of a cylinder. Depending on the angle that you look at it, what others say about how they see it does not hold true for what you see. Even though both views are by themselves true, the truth is something else completely. Well, this is a bit, a linguistic problem as well, but it is an implicit part of the world of Mononoke, where true things are not necessarily the truth. And the same is true for the art style. It's flashy, yeah, and sometimes hard to follow, yeah, but it's kind of like as if it were to underline the point of you not exactly being able to know what you are looking at. And coming back to this lack of shades and seeing how colors are constrained to the distinct fields, these are techniques that are from early woodblock printing. So in woodblock printing, or also the preceding Ishitsuri-e, that is a print, imitating a stone rubbing. So you would cut the image into a block of wood and then create a negative. And then you add, the color to the block of wood and press it onto paper. It's kind of like a stamp. So at the beginning, you would only carve the outline, similar as you would with a black Sharpie, so the print looks like they have black outlines. But then they started to carve out the space in between the lines and fill them with color. And in early printing, there was reddish or other natural pigments. Now in 1765, Suzuki Harunobu developed the multicolor prints. These were called Nishiki-e, and that is already a really hard technique. And this then continued to evolve. This evolved and developed more and more. In the 19th century, the full-fledged ukiyo-e was invented. So ukiyo-e means image from the fleeting world, and they were actually pretty advanced multicolor prints, and I think they do resemble our Mononoke the closest, yes. So probably the most famous ukiyo-e has to be the Hokusai's Great Wave of Kanagawa. It's from around 1830-ish, which marks one of the cornerstones in printing techniques. So in this case it is, how he used a rare blue and how it was incorporated and used in a myriad of shades. I mean, creating a fade from a light to dark is brutally difficult to produce if you have, only a single block of wood and no Photoshop available. So prints like these massively influenced the rest of the 19th century wood prints. And this style was put into Mononoke, to follow this idea of printing a picture book where you could take any single scene and maybe, just use it as a print. The most famous storybook in Japanese history is potentially the Tale of Genji, the Genji Monogatari. It is a fantastic work. It's written in the early 11th century by the noblewoman called Murasaki Shikibu. And, of course, Mononoke doesn't make a direct reference, for instance, to this masterpiece. So I think the anime Genji Monogatari Sennenki did that in 2009. And if you're really nerding out about this, I can highly recommend the book No Drama and the Tale of Genji. It's by Janet Emily Goff. Not affiliated, it's just, a very nice story, and the historical insight is quite nice to know if you want to understand the Japanese culture of the time better. What is very interesting is that printmaking and theater are actually very closely connected during this late Edo period. And actor prints, they were loved collectibles among the population. So we have to look into theater to some degree as well, if we discuss, the certain styles of printmaking. So first, yes, Mononoke indicates the theater very obviously. It's not too hard to reason that, it could be a kabuki theater reference because it is so well known it makes sense. When you see though that is, we have several instances in the beginning where they use masks to enhance the faces, expressions, and display, spiritual moments. Now, masks are one hell of a topic to cover, so maybe let's put a pin on that. What I'm getting at is that masks are not really a thing in kabuki theater. So just mentioning of, kabuki due to costumes and playstyle is not that satisfying to my idle nerd brain, no. Kabuki came into being in the late Edo period, and one big point is that you would usually use face paint when acting the drama. The drama is rather stylized with, grand costumes, big wigs, and, you have these wonderful performances that were meant for all sort of audiences. There are some on YouTube, actually I can highly recommend that you just have a look. But if you look at the traditional theatre forms, you see that there exists a variety of traditional Japanese theatre forms before that. Kabuki is one of the theatre forms. A predecessor of the kabuki is called No theatre. So we have to look at that first. The No theatre is a few hundred years older and more traditional. It combines music, dance, acting. It's very difficult to play actually. And a big difference is that the main actor would wear masks in No tale. And they tell tales that are, closer resembling a Buddhist story, and therefore they're often supernatural. I think the Khan Academy here on YouTube has a wonderful intro to kabuki. I can highly recommend to check it out if you want to learn more about it. For instance, why men played roles for men and women, and not the other way around. So all in all, the more modern kabuki theater had more freedom, thematically speaking, than the No theater. And that is exactly what Mononoke does. It takes the thematic freedom of kabuki, but it also displays the spirituality like in the No theater. It brings the stories to life as if they were a picture book created in the Edo period, but they made it in a style that you would expect to see in the period pierced together with the modern 2D and 3D CGI graphics. I think it takes a big step into displaying these very, very traditional Japanese arts and themes, elements, and reinterprets them in a modern way. And I think that's wonderful to see. It's a rather bold experiment with styles and storytelling. But not only does Mononoke tell some beautifully critical stories about ourselves and our times, it is filled with tropes and symbols. I think it's a wonderful reinterpretation and a celebration of bits and pieces of Japanese cultural artifacts. As an anime, I think it was an experiment that was ahead of its time, regardless, whether one likes it or not. At least that's what I see. And I'm excited for the movie. Maybe that deserves a deeper look in, in like 5 years or so. So thanks for being here. This is Andreas. See you around.